Climate Action Network side event, Women for Climate Justice, Leading Solutions on the Front Lines of Climate Change. My name is Osprey, Orielle, and I am the Executive Director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, or WECAN. And I really first want to thank these amazing women for participating in this event to share their really important perspectives. And I'm going to introduce them now and then have some opening comments. We're going to be hearing from Orielle Derringer, who is Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation. She's the Executive Director of the Indigenous Climate Action, and she's from Canada. Then we're going to be hearing from Sônia Guajajara of the Guajajara people. She's the Executive Coordinator of APIB in the Brazilian Amazon. And then we will be hearing from Sustin Nanang. She is Gender and Food Security Officer from the National Association of Professional Environmentalists from Uganda. And then we will be hearing from Casey Camp-Horinek. She's from the Ponca Nation. She is an environmental ambassador, and we're really honored to have her on our WECAN board from Turtle Island, USA. And we have another speaker who we hope will show up, and I will introduce her at that point. Grassroots, Frontline, and Indigenous women are gathered at COP26 to strategize and accelerate our collective efforts to halt the worst impacts of the climate crisis, to stop extractivism and protect our lands, forests, water, and our children's future. And we also do not forget the voices of women and feminist leaders who are not here. The serious inequities playing out at this COP have not made this the inclusive COP as was so loudly proclaimed to be, but rather it's become quite exclusive. Vaccine apartheid and the COP26 leadership's failure to plan an equitable forum has led to large numbers of advocates being locked out of participation at this vital international forum. Now that we're here, constituency bodies have been given very little access to negotiating spaces. People cannot access critical negotiations about our collective future and how our communities are being impacted. Women, feminists, and gender diverse leaders continue to be underrepresented, and only 16% of the COP 2016 UK leadership team is women. Yet, the voices of grassroots, frontline, and Indigenous women and gender diverse leaders could not be more important. It's also important to highlight that the violence against the earth is directly linked to violence against women, and that the current dominator society of patriarchy, colonization, racism, and neoliberal capitalism is based upon power over and exploitation of women, the land, and peoples of color. Women standing for climate justice refuse to accept this paradigm. Given current country commitments, even with commitments that were made last week, we are heading to a catastrophic rise in global temperatures by the end of the century. Quite simply, this is a death sentence, and we do not accept this lack of action. The time is now for urgent and transformative action based on social and ecological justice. Importantly, women can and are making a significant difference in changing our current trajectory, and we need to accelerate the leadership and visibility of women, especially Indigenous, Black, Brown, and grassroots women. As study after study shows, it is paramount to recognize that there will be no effective action on climate change until women's struggles, leadership, and solutions are at the forefront. WECAN is highlighting a feminist analysis and women's leadership through the demands of the Women and Gender constituency and through our WECAN collective call to action that was recently delivered to governments and financial institutions by the Global Women's Assembly for Climate Justice that we hosted in September during the UNGA. And this is our call to action. It's online. And we also outline a whole series of frameworks from a climate justice framework for governments to look at, to be guided by people's movements and from community-led solutions. It is a call to action from women and feminists around the world, representing millions of people, outlining in explicit detail what can be done to meet the 1.5-degree target with already existing climate justice frameworks. We included both governments and financial institutions in our recommendations because we are well aware of the power of the fossil fuel industry in these two sectors. 60% of the largest banks in the world have collectively financed $3.8 trillion in fossil fuel companies since the Paris Agreement. And the recent report by the UN Environment Program found that governments still plan to produce more than double the amount of fossil fuels in 2030 than what would be consistent with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. How can we successfully navigate COP26 with these impossible numbers? The question is, where are the government leaders willing to stand up to the fossil fuel industry? And where is the $100 billion promised from wealthy countries so we can move toward a just transition? We can move billions once we claim a global climate emergency, trillions. And pulling from military budgets is a good place to begin. I find my deepest hope in how we navigate this moment with women leaders around the world. We are in the streets, in the fields, in the boardrooms. We are in the halls of power. We are putting our bodies on the line. Some of us are getting arrested, criminalized, subjected to pain compliance, and even murdered for standing up for the last of the clean water, the last of the forests, for what we hold as sacred, for the last chance for our climate and a livable future. What is happening now is not only unjust, but it's actually insane, and we have to stop it. So, in our call to action, we are also supporting the immediate implementation of the Escazú Agreement to protect land defenders, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, community-led solutions, rights of nature, and much more. We do not accept the false solutions such as market-based mechanisms presented in Article 6. We say our earth is not for sale. We will not allow for sacrificed people and sacrifice zones, or corporate colonialisms, or incremental transitions to renewable energy, or false solutions like carbon offset schemes instead of stopping pollution at the source. Rather, we are willing to fight for real solutions, solutions based on climate justice and respect for the natural laws of our earth, and to use our imaginations to be alive, to thrive, to be courageous, to be uncomfortable for positive changes, to be bold, and to win. We are willing to endlessly fight for policies that prioritize social, racial, and economic justice, and Indigenous and human rights. We are rising all over the world, and we are growing stronger. We can act now, and we must act now. Let's totally break business as usual at COP26 and create the healthy and just world we know is possible. And with that, I want to show a short video before we move into the speakers because, again, a lot of our Global South partners were not able to come because of the inequities. So this is the voice of Nima Namandamu from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank you.
When I come back here after 25 years, I was shocked. When I was a little girl, the forest was here. And when I was here, I see no more trees. Idea was how again people can bring life back.
As the climate crisis increases, scientists are telling us that one of the most important things that we can do is to protect forests and biodiversity. The Congo Basin is one of the largest and most important forests of the world, only second to the Amazon in terms of size. And there we are reforesting damaged lands that due to extractive industries, agricultural business, have been completely turned into deserts.
We have now 500 women. They are planting those trees. And when you're planting trees, you are honor those trees and you are honor on the land. That is not usual on our culture, women to have some propriety, some ownership. That gives us really confidence.
Ibi byose nijoro biteye kandi nijoro uzubibagarira iri ni ishyamba ryanje.
75% of the trees are going to rewilding the forest, some of them now are 20 feet tall, and we're quickly seeing the forest begin to regenerate, and 25% are for human use, so that we can ensure that we're protecting the 1.6 million acres of old-growth forest. This is where their food comes from, where their medicines come from, where the things they need for their homes come from, their pharmacy.
Ibiti akamaro ko kubitera icyo bimarira n'icyo mbitegeyemo cyane ni ukugira ngo tuzongere tubone imvura muri iki gihugu cyacu. Ibiti byarashize.
Turifuza yuko bino biti za WECAN zokomeza tukongera tukagarura amashamba.
Women, they are now protecting environment with trees. Women of Itombwe forest, natural forest from DRC, we are trying to protect our environment.
We're now protecting 1.6 million acres of old-growth forest over the years as we reforest in the Congo Basin.
Kuko byamariye njewe ku giti cyanje bimpesha ihewa nziza muri iki gihugu cyacu.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a real need to develop more food sovereignty and food security. So now not only in the nurseries that we have are we planting sapling trees, but also lots of food for the local communities.
Vegetables we did really helped so much. People to have vegetables to fight with malnutrition.
And the women are just so proud to not only be planting trees and healing their damaged homelands, but also protecting this old-growth forest for all of us, for doing their part in mitigating the climate crisis. So for all of these things, it's a very comprehensive project that's lifting up women, lifting up Indigenous peoples and their traditional ways of life, protecting old-growth forest and reforesting damaged lands.
All of these forests will become soon big one, and we want to really to have again bring new oxygen. Wind will be stopping winds, and it's really very, very, very important. Trees, they are life.
So I'm so glad we could bring Nima Namadamu to her project and her voice here. And I want to recognize that Helena Gualinga, who is Quechua from the Ecuadorian Amazon, has now joined us. She's a youth leader and our WECAN young woman lead for the area. And now I'd like to move to our first speaker. Ariel, please take us away.
Thank you. Iklana Dennis Ariel Ekwe Duranje Betsiani Hasli. My name is Ariel Ekwe Duranje, and I'm a member of the Athabasca Chippewan First Nation, and I just want to say thank you for having me today as a part of this panel. I think some of the articulations that Osprey brought in her introduction to the panel, and even seeing the video, really demonstrates that the power of women is rising right now. And I think that this isn't an accident. Colonization, extractivism, capitalism, these things that came into our territories and ripped us from our lands and simultaneously ripped out our trees, ripped our lands apart for the resources that were underneath them, didn't just destroy our lands and territories and our connections to those places, but they imposed systems of patriarchy. These systems of patriarchy help uplift these systems of extractivism and capitalism and uphold the tenets of colonialism that we are seeing continue to proliferate the negotiations within the UN mechanisms and negotiations here at COP26 and all of the COPs that have happened. But further to that, what we're also seeing is that for every Indigenous representative and constituency at this COP, we're seeing at least 2 oil and gas lobbyists attend these spaces. So this isn't just about trying to have our voices women heard, but those that have been marginalized and oppressed from these systems for so long. But when you look at who the constituents are that are pushing back against these false solutions and oil and gas lobbyists, it's women. And that is not an accident. Those patriarchal systems that came into our communities that were imposed, with the resurgence of indigeneity, with the resurgence of our Indigenous cultures and our identities to push back not just against false solutions, but extractivism, and against these systems of colonization, it is women coming to the forefronts. I come from a community that's impacted by the largest industrial project on planet Earth, the Alberta oil sands. And when I first got into this movement, it wasn't men that asked us to step up. It was my cousin Lisa Tazazi, and she said to me, they're killing us. They're poisoning our water. They're poisoning our land. They don't care about us. And the second person that said to me we need to do something was an elder in my community, Alice Rigney. And she said, Ariel, they don't give a shit about us up here anymore. They're killing us, they don't care. Something has to be done. And it was that pushback of the women in our communities to those leaders, the men that were the so-called leaders in our community that said, we have had enough. We're going to do something. And as we grew the movement to challenge the Alberta tar sands, what we saw was on the pipeline corridors, the struggles to stop these extractive industries from putting their tentacles across Turtle Island to ship that dirty oil, it was women. Women in the tiny house wires in the Secwepemc Nation, women at Line 3, women at the KXL, women on the Enbridge pipeline that was killed and stopped. It was women that have been standing up. These women put their lives on the line, and they continue to till this day. And it's women in our community that are pushing back and saying we need better protections, because it's us that are the nurturers in our community. I have also had community members that have lost children because of the contamination in our ecosystems, to our water systems, our food sources. We feel this most deeply. It's our children that tell us the stories that we carry as nurturers for our children in our communities, where even my own children don't want to live in my community because they're afraid to get cancer and die. This is not just about climate change. This is about the fact that the systems that are driving the climate crisis continue to be proliferated and lifted up even in these negotiations by allowing false solutions to create sacrifice zones, carbon offsetting that says tar sands can continue to grow so that our community can continue to be contaminated and poisoned indefinitely, and that they can then protect a forest somewhere else. We have to ensure that the beautiful work that we just saw in the video doesn't get appropriated by oil and gas industries so that they can offset what's happening in my region in the Alberta tar sands. So as we move forward and we look for ways to come together, we have to look not just at how we reduce the emissions in the atmosphere, which we do absolutely need to do to get to 1.5 degrees, but we have to look at how we reconcile addressing the systemic problems within these negotiations, how we address colonization, how we address capitalism, how we address the ongoing extractivism in our territories, and most importantly, how we address the systems of patriarchy that continue to oppress women, that continue to push us out of positions of power, that continue to marginalize our voices in these systems and in these negotiations, and we advocate for the gender and justice constituencies, that we advocate and support the calls for action within those systems, and also within the calls to action within the Indigenous constituencies that are also seeing the rise of women continue to come up. In addition, I just want to state that what we're looking for within these structures isn't so that our voices can be co-opted. We're often seeing that people nod their heads, yes, oh yes, gender injustice, yes, Indigenous rights, but they take our movements and they co-opt them, and they pervert them, and they interpret them under these colonial, patriarchal frameworks, and they move them forward without us. We cannot continue to allow this co-optation of our voices. We cannot continue to allow the false solutions that take our voices away from us while giving lip service to our rights and titles. And on the last point that I want to make is that this is not just an issue that we're trying to have our voices heard within this system. We're looking to advocate for power and decision-making, self-determination over what happens in our communities so that we are decision makers, so that we can continue to rise into the positions of power that we rightfully deserve, and that we have those answers and those solutions and those relationships with the key places in our lands and territories, within our communities, and as leaders, as women and Indigenous peoples. Thank you, Masicho.
Thank you so much, Errol, for those comments. And I think, speaking of this COP and the fact of how much exclusion there's been, I really appreciate you bringing forward the fact that we need frontline women leaders at the table. And it's not just that we want women, like at this particular COP, there was a discussion about, how many women were in the room. Is it 50-50? It's not just having women in the room, it's having diverse women in the room, having frontline and Indigenous women in the room, and that knowledge from the ground is so essential. So thank you for highlighting that. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and hand the floor to Sônia Guajajara. Please go ahead, Sônia. Thank you.
Olá, bom dia, muito obrigada. Saudar aqui todas as pessoas que estão nos acompanhando, né, nessa roda de conversa de mulheres de diversas partes do mundo.
And so good morning. Thank you so much. I wish to salute all the women that are partaking in this conversation, women from all over the world.
Nós estamos num momento muito especial das mulheres, né? As mulheres estão na linha de frente, protagonizando a luta e provocando mudanças.
We are in a very special moment for women, in which women are standing on the front lines and really creating change.
No Brasil, nós estamos num processo muito interessante, né, onde estamos motivando, né, e fortalecendo a luta das mulheres nas aldeias, nos territórios, mas também nos espaços de participação fora das aldeias.
In Brazil, we are going through a very interesting moment in which we are not only incentivizing that women are speaking up, but also participating in decision-making spaces.
Temos mulheres já ocupando os espaços de coordenação geral das organizações indígenas, temos mulheres deputadas, deputada federal, co-deputada estadual.
We are women who are taking up the spaces as executive coordinators of indigenous organizations, but also taking political spaces, such as a deputy or senator in the federal government.
Como a deputada Joênia, né, no Congresso Nacional, e a Shirley Pancará, no estado de São Paulo.
Just Congresswomen Joênia and Shirley Pancará in the state of São Paulo.
Para nós é muito importante a ocupação desses espaços. E no próximo ano, né, que é ano de eleições no Brasil, nós queremos incentivar e fortalecer as candidaturas das mulheres indígenas.
And so for us, it is very important that we take up these spaces, and for the upcoming elections in the next year, we want to strengthen that and have more Indigenous women taking up these roles.
Nós precisamos aumentar essa presença, essa representatividade das mulheres nos espaços de tomada de decisão.
What we need to do is to magnify and strengthen the presence of Indigenous women in the power positions.
Nós realizamos esse ano a segunda Marcha das Mulheres Indígenas, que teve como tema Mulheres Originárias Reflorestando Mentes para a Cura da Terra.
We've had this year our second Indigenous Women's March in Brazil, which had as its theme the reforestation of minds for the healing of the earth.
E esse é um chamado global das mulheres indígenas do Brasil para todas as mulheres do mundo.
And this is a global call from Indigenous women in Brazil to all the women around the world.
Nós teremos uma plataforma na internet e vamos formar os grupos sementes e os biomas digitais.
We have an online platform in which we are creating seed groups as well as digital biomes.
Queremos fortalecer essa participação e empoderamento das mulheres de todos os biomas, porque somente todos os biomas, né, no Brasil, Mata Atlântica, Cerrado, Caatinga, Pantanal, Pampas e Amazônia, protegidos, nós vamos conseguir proteger todo o ecossistema.
We wish to have this participation happening from all over the world and in all different kinds of ecosystems, such as in Brazil, we have Pantanal, we have the wetlands, the grasslands, the drylands, we have the Amazon. And so for all these territories to be protected, we created these different biomes.
O Reflorestar Mentes é um chamado para ação.
The reforestation of minds is a call to action.
E nós vamos fazer a discussão do papel das mulheres indígenas frente às mudanças climáticas.
And so we can create the discussion about the role of women in front facing the climate changing.
A participação das mulheres na política institucional.
As well as the participation of women in institutional policies.
Vamos aprofundar a discussão sobre o combate à violência doméstica.
We wish to take the discussion further about the fight towards domestic violence.
Sim, nós precisamos reduzir essa violência contra as mulheres para que estejam fortes para seguir fazendo a luta, né, de proteção à Mãe Terra.
We have to reduce the domestic violence that many women go through so that they can be in an empowered position to be able to fight and stand up on our struggle for Mother Earth.
Para falar hoje de justiça climática, precisamos falar da soberania alimentar.
If we wish to speak about climate change, we first of all need to speak about food sovereignty.
O fortalecimento da nossa cultura.
The strengthening of our cultures.
E a proteção dos nossos modos de vida.
The protection of our ways of living.
E para essas garantias, é importante a demarcação e a proteção dos nossos territórios.
And for these to be guaranteed, it is crucial that our lands are demarked and are protected.
A ausência dessa demarcação provoca muitos conflitos.
The lack of our territories demarcation causes many conflicts.
Traz muita insegurança e violência para dentro dos territórios.
And it brings a lot of insecurity and violence into our territories.
E geralmente somos nós, mulheres, as mais impactadas, as mais violentadas.
And it is usually us, the women, the ones who suffer from the most violence and are most impacted with it.
E por isso nós estamos fazendo esse convite para que todas as mulheres venham para a linha de frente.
And this is why we are creating this call so that all women come to the front line with us.
Nós queremos não só vir para a COP, participar de espaços separados. Nós queremos estar dentro dos espaços de negociação.
We wish to not only come to COP and participate in secluded spaces of conversations, we want to be in the spaces where the negotiations are taking place.
É muito importante a participação da juventude.
The participation of youth is really important.
É muito importante a participação dos nossos líderes comunitários para trazer a sua sabedoria tradicional.
It is very important as well that our community leaders are participating so that they can bring their traditional wisdom and knowledge into the conversation.
E nós estamos aqui para dizer que não estamos de acordo com qualquer negociação que não respeite os direitos dos povos indígenas e que não considere a participação, a visão das mulheres indígenas.
And we are here to say that we do not support any decision that is being made not taking into consideration the participation of indigenous women and our rights in these conversations.
As mulheres estão lutando no mundo inteiro para conter as mudanças climáticas.
Women are fighting all over the world in order to stop the effects of climate change.
Mas o feminicídio também das mulheres cresce no mundo inteiro.
But feminicide, the murdering of women, also impacts women all over the world.
Então, falar de justiça climática é falar também para parar de matar as mulheres indígenas.
And so when we speak about climate justice, we also speak about stop the murdering of indigenous women.
E deixamos aqui esse chamado para o reflorestar mentes, o reflorestar de pensamento, o reflorestar de ideias, o reflorestar de todos os corações.
And we leave this calling to the reforestation of minds, the reforestation of ideas, the reforestation of actions and our thoughts, so then we can reforest our territories.
No Brasil, estamos muito ameaçada pelo governo Bolsonaro.
In Brazil, we are very much threatened by the Bolsonaro government.
Por isso, pela primeira vez, estamos aqui com a maior presença das mulheres indígenas.
That is why, for the first time, we are here with the greatest presence of indigenous women.
Porque Bolsonaro não é mais somente uma ameaça para o Brasil. se tornou uma ameaça para o planeta.
Because Bolsonaro is not only a threat to Brazil, but he has become a threat to the world.
E quero terminar convidando todas as pessoas que estão aqui, que estão acompanhando aqui para um ato que nós vamos, a delegação do Brasil vai realizar amanhã, né, um ato que é liderado pelas mulheres indígenas.
And I wish to invite everyone here for a march that we will be performing by delegations and leaders from all over Brazil that will be conducted by our indigenous leaders.
Para passar essa mensagem ao mundo que sem nós não haverá solução para a crise climática.
To be able to share this message with the world that without us there is no solution for the climate change, for the climate crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sônia, for your really important comments. And I also wanted just to celebrate with you that Sônia has been very involved with these big women's marches in Brazil. And they had one just earlier this year with 4,000 indigenous women from all over Brazil marching. And just to note the courage it takes to be on the front lines in Brazil and in some of the other countries in Latin America where some of the highest rates of killings of land defenders are taking place. So it's a very courageous situation and a life and death situation for a lot of the women who also suffer from violent attacks and sexual attacks, as well as being criminalized for standing up for their land and territory. So I just really wanted to honor specifically the kind of courage it takes to take a stand for your communities. So thank you for that. And with that, I would like to hand the floor now to Sustin Nanang. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Osprey. Sustin Nanang is my name. I work for the National Association of Professional Environmentalists, and we are based in Uganda. And thank you, sisters, for starting this conversation, because it takes me to a reflection that one thing that I've learned in this pandemic is how important and integral rural women farmers are. When the pandemic happened, most of us did not worry whether we go to the saloon, whether we go to, the club. All we needed was food. The only thing that you wanted to survive on, you didn't care about other things, but you cared about food. And this is the only thing, because airports were closed, supermarkets were getting out of food. Some of them were actually even closed. And the only people that left feeding us from, for example, Uganda, is the rural women farmers. And it's because they would go to their gardens. You can easily social distance in a garden, and you're able to do the farming. And the only people that were not restricted to move were the ones that had the goods. So for me, the lesson is the fact that we depended on women whose land has actually been stolen and turned into refineries and other oil infrastructures. So that questions you, or that puts into a position of where are our priorities? That the lesson is that we need to actually invest more in rural grassroots women so that we are able to protect their land tenure rights, and they can feed us now and the future crises to come. Because for me, the issue of farming relates to the issue of what my sister just mentioned around the extractive model of development that we are dealing with, converting thousands and thousands of acres into large agro-commodities, sugarcane, palm oil, and all this mechanization comes with an effect of sprayicides, which are not good for the soil and the organisms, which at the end of the day also wash away into fresh ecosystems and all killing our environment, which also equally leads to the issue of climate change. So for me, that's one lesson that I've learned, that we cannot eat oil, we cannot eat sugar, we cannot feed our children with sugar, but we need to invest in the grassroots woman who is actually making the feeding that has happened in this pandemic and the pandemics to actually come. Then also that brings me to a point that Osprey talked about around the issue of the 100 billion. From where I come from and the continent that I represent right now, Africa, and which I'm very proud of, is the issue around climate financing and where our priorities are. The issue of financing for climate is extremely unpredictable, and the issue of accessibility is also very difficult to get those monies. And what that means for where I come from is the fact that you cannot be able to plan in an environment where funds are not predictable. How do you be able to plan? So that puts you in a very awkward position. And if we don't get those monies, then they don't trickle down to the small community-led, women-centered initiatives that we are supposed to be fronting going forward. And also, that also brings me to the point of how we need to question big organizations or finance climate institutions like GCF. So you need to question how they work for us in that say, what are the amount of conditionalities that have actually been put to be able to access those funds. So for me, it feels like if there are a lot of high conditionalities, then that means there is little autonomy of power to really direct the funds to where they are actually needed. And those are grassroots women initiatives. Those are community-led initiatives. And we need to change that. How do we make the money come down? How do we make microfinance to come down? How do we ensure these funds are actually coming to the levels that we want them to be? How do we ensure that the conditions and also the way their proposals are made, it needs to be softened, streamlined, and made easier so that these funds can actually reach the people that actually need them. And that said, for me, it's also the fact that I've been working with grassroots women for now 4 years. We started an initiative of the ecofeminism movement. And this is to bring out the element that the way nature suffers, the way we are handling and facing the crisis is that it equally has a connection with women. Because the women, they are naturers, but everything that happens to the environment, then at the end of the day, the burden is shouldered by the women because they are the ones that mostly end up as climate refugees. They are the ones that end up having to stay behind to feed the children. So everything that happens to the women is also equally happening to the environment. So for me, the concept of the ecofeminist movement is to bring alive the practical responses that grassroots women in my community are actually doing, which includes having a concept of like land queens. So land queens are community women who are our eyes and ears on the ground, that they talk about the concept of constitutional legal provisions that actually protect their land and also protect themselves from the corporations and allies that are coming to their communities to convert their land into business-centered profiting businesses like oil and gas per se. And also the concept of ensuring that we are going away from the issue of dirty energy and going to renewables, making sure that communities are fronting things like charcoal briquettes and making sure that this concept is used at the district level to advocate for democratic-centered energies that benefit the women. And challenging, because we've also seen another element of new ways of renewable energies turning into business as usual corporate models. You bring solar, but you monopolize the technology, and it doesn't get back to the communities. You bring solar, you want to give loans to the communities to pay you in exchange, and the interest is higher. So let it come from the grassroots women, the communities, and then let's make it more national and international, but not come from a corporate angle. I think lastly, I have my 1 minute, is to call upon everyone that is watching us today to ensure that in every decision that we're doing, the negotiations, there are many people that didn't make it here. Let them be involved in their own respective way. And when we talk about diversity and inclusiveness, it's also not about just able-bodied women. It's also about women that face the climate crisis in very different or it hits them harder. Those are women with disabilities, those are single mothers, those are women with HIV, ensuring that we bring them and center them into the conversation. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your really important comments and your perspective. We really appreciate you also taking this journey here. I just wanted to, before I hand the floor over to Helena Gualinga and then to Casey Camp-Horinek, just say, this is why women are calling for systemic change, because we are looking at, one, dealing with the emergencies in our own communities, which is stopping an immediate extraction fossil fuel extraction pipeline or oil or gas problems in our area. So yes, we are fighting directly for our forests, for our lands, for our water, and those are immediate emergency fights. But as you can hear from the presenters, we also are calling for deep systemic change, and that is the difference. We don't want business as usual. We don't want net zero. We actually want real zero, real emissions to be stopped, real change. And so I think that's really important in this messaging for this panel, is that we understand that there's a systemic problem, and that's why we're coming at it from this intersectional lens of colonization, patriarchy, capitalism, feminism, and really saying we want a very different worldview and a different system because the one we're in isn't working. And with that, I'd like to hand the floor to you, Helena.
Thank you. My name is Elena Wallinga. I'm 19 and I come from an indigenous community in the Ecuadorian Amazon. Growing up, I was surrounded by a lot of strong women, a lot of female leaders, and I think that has contributed a lot to the person I have become today. But reflecting on how they became the women they were, I know all the hardships that they went through, being land defenders, and also being women exposed to the cities, for example, in Ecuador, when the younger women had to leave for school, for example, they needed to go to the cities and leave their families and being very unsafe spaces for young women. And Ecuador still is, but at the time was very, very racist. So to be an indigenous woman walking on the streets could be dangerous for you, and it still is. So I think what really created their powerful presence is really everything that they went through. And I think that it even encouraged them more to be proud of being indigenous and of making sure that they as women could defend themselves and that they as women would not let anyone step on them. And I think this is really tied to that these women had a very strong connection to their lands and to their culture, to our culture. And I think this is this connection between the identity of being indigenous and of being a woman and of the connection to land. And I'm seeing that today with younger women and women my age that their land has been stolen back in the Amazon, or that oil has come in, or mining companies are in, and there is this struggle of who am I? Who am I? Am I supposed to be here? And they start to question themselves, even like, do I have the right to this land? And it's really sad to see that, and I think the connection to land needs to be a priority for not just women but everyone. But we need to make sure that we show that to younger women today, and that we show that to children today, because only then can we actually defend our lands, if we have this sense of I know this land is mine, but also this feeling of being proud of who you are as an indigenous woman. And I think that in the modern world, that's not what people are telling us. That's not what people are telling us to, it's not, you don't want to be an indigenous woman in this society. And I'm really proud to say that I really am proud of being indigenous. And I think that has motivated me a lot to do the work that I do today. And I think in a lot of the young women that I see around me that are doing this work are people that are extremely proud of who they are, and extremely proud of the roots that we have. And again, this ties to the hardships that they went through to protect our lands. I mean, there, just in my community, in a lot of communities, when oil companies or mining companies come in, young women have had to fight against not just only the oil companies destroying their lands, but actually coming for their bodies too. So I think there is this sense of, you know, this power of like an anger that incentivized this power to fight back. And it's interesting because we're like talking about, you know, like we should invest in the money, and so and you're talking about where is the money actually going, and a lot of that needs to go to Indigenous women and needs to go towards young women also and children, so that the next generation can be prepared for everything that is coming against us. And I think the funds do not only need to go to, you know, immediate support when like crises are happening. It needs to be something that keeps. We need to start building, and we need to start building from the youngest generations already. And, you know, I just in the Amazon and in neighbor communities, you can see the difference in a community when funds actually are allocated towards women and towards young women or mothers, how the entire dynamic in the community changes. And I think it's, you know, and that also is about ties to the protection of lands, because often why women feel that they need to leave their lands, or why just people in general feel like they have to give up their lands, are because they feel the need of supporting their family with money, because the world is changing now, and the children needs to go to school, and we need to buy books, and we need to buy pens. But the entire thing changes when women actually are able to keep living on their lands, keep working on the lands the way they've used to, but they also can have something else, a smaller project going on, so that they can make sure that their children can go to school. And that is how we ensure that the protection of Indigenous lands continues. And these are very, very small projects, but that makes a huge difference for spaces like the Amazon and for Indigenous communities. And that are young, very young mothers, for example, young women that are mothers, that are, and that's why we need to focus a lot on the younger generations too.
Thank you so much, Helena, for bringing that youth voice and your youth activism. And you said many important things, but one thing that, you know, we've seen working with women all over the world through the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, that again is not recognized in our current systems, is that a lot of what women are doing on the ground level, in the grassroots level, Indigenous peoples, Black and Brown women, are these quote-unquote small projects that are really addressing needs that you have all talked about. And when you add them up, they become a giant solution. But because it doesn't show up in these big corporate programs, and it's not a way for wealthy countries to get wealthier or corporations to get wealthier, it's actually wealth from the ground, really feeding real families, real communities. It's not recognized, but it's actually a solution. And when you add up all these different projects, this ecosystem of work that women are doing, it's quite powerful. And it gets unrecognized because it doesn't fit into the corporate model. So thank you for pointing that out amongst many other really important points. Thank you so much. And with that, I would like to hand the floor to Casey Camp-Horinek. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you all. It's been an amazing moment listening to you and to learn from you, from the youngest to those of you in the middle of your lives, and from all portions of the earth right now. I serve as the environmental ambassador for the Ponca Nation in Oklahoma, in the occupied territory of the United States. And as that, I'm the matriarch of a huge clan. I'm wearing the McDonald tartan because part of my clan is also from this land 5 generations ago that married into my people there. And it's an interesting time to see that the patriarchy and the type of things that came onto the shores when Columbus and his people came 500 years ago has been such an impact that we are now dispossessed of those natural laws that the people already knew, and that we're back. We're still trying to teach you that the laws that you have broken, the laws that you have imposed, the patriarchy that you have imposed on our people have become a killing fields for us in every single way, from the rape and the murder of our women to begin with, and the kidnapping of our people off to your boarding schools, and the brainwashing, and the type of imposed economy that you also laid on us has created a situation that we are now having to reteach you how to live again within the natural laws, how to align the human laws with natural laws one more time, or else our species, the human species, will become extinct. And the type of genocide that you are now imposing, when I hear Orielle talking about the fact that there are 2 people from the extractive industry, from the fossil fuel industry here, for every one of us indigenous people, well, they should have a sign on their neck that says mass murderers. And then we could identify them more easily to be able to walk up to them and saying, at my home where I live in north central Oklahoma, the extractive industry is causing such severe health problems for my children that we are on the brink again of another genocide imposed by people like you from the very beginning. That the genocide now looks like babies being born with cancers. It looks like deer with big boils on them. It looks like fish kills in the water. It looks like oil swimming on top of the water and suffocating the life within. It looks like elders who don't have a place to live anymore. It looks like people on the streets because you have dispossessed them of a place to grow their garden, because you have killed all the buffalo, and so we don't have those relatives to interact with anymore. Because you have killed the cultural places where we taught each other this way to go forward. And we've had this time that for decades now, the indigenous people, led by the women, have been coming to these spaces and saying, it's time, it's time, it's time, it's time, it's time. Now it's past time. Now you have blown your chance in order to recreate a space through just transitions and reteaching everybody how to live within the natural laws. During the time of COVID, when the rest of us sat home, when we interacted with our families, when we did wonder where the food was going to come, when you can't grow organic food in my territory within 8 miles of our people because of the manner in which we're polluted, when the water herself has been killed. It's a remarkable situation to sit back at that time as a great grandma and look out the windows, not be able to see my family, not knowing if they're safe, and to see the birds are still flying in their natural flights to the best of their ability. They're still building their circle places to live, and to see the wild turkey walking through my yard, knowing exactly where it's supposed to go, and to see the deer wander through knowing where they're supposed to go. Only human beings have wildly broken the natural laws, and it's become evident. And until we realign ourselves with those natural laws, things will continue like the melting of the polar ice caps has caused then these enormous jet streams to be unpredictable. It's caused animals and relatives to come up from the south into the territory because they're reacquainting themselves with the new world. We are watching these things, and we have the key to understanding what the wind is telling us by whether it's coming north or south, what it's carrying with us, what new species are in our territories, where the natural seeds are growing, they're healing the earth. And those GMO seeds are no longer functioning because you have to add chemical after chemical after chemical to them. It's become a situation where these mass murderers are coming into these spaces and co-opting truth for more lies. They're so Trump, aren't they? Oh my goodness. He's learned well, and there's so many followers behind him right now. So my advice to you, as a matriarch of this group, as a matriarch of my family at home, is to pay attention to Indigenous knowledge right now. Because as the Mother Earth transitions, and she told us she was going to go into a period of purification for a couple of generations now, she will endure. Do we continue as a species? That's up to us. Transition away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible. Don't think you can buy and sell the air and think that the wind won't blow where you are too. Don't think that this sacred water that is comprised of 3% in the fresh waters will renew itself without your help. All of those things and the earth herself will regenerate. But we have to be part of a sacred cycle of life. We have to move to circular economies. We have to be less selfish and more given. And we'll start the ball rolling. Are you going to catch it?
Thank you so much, Casey, for your wisdom that you bring to us and your powerful words. And we're going to give everyone a chance to have a closing remark. I wanted to point out again this call to action that is online from the Women's Assembly for Climate Justice, and we'll make sure to get this linked in, the Global Women's Assembly for Climate Justice. And I mention it because we don't have time here to talk about really the plethora of solutions that women are putting out there. And I just wanted to highlight, everything from agro-ecology to Indigenous knowledge that was mentioned, the incredible knowledge that Indigenous peoples bring. 80% of the biodiversity left on Earth right now is in the lands and hands of Indigenous peoples, and there's a reason for that, which is their understanding of how to live in a good way with the land in a way of reciprocity. So I really wanted to bring forward that knowledge from the community that Helena is from. The Sariaco people have the Living Forest proposal, which is an incredible proposal from Indigenous peoples about how to live with the forest. That is quite in-depth and scientific, spiritual, ecological, economic, a full systems view of how to live with the forests. So there's so many solutions, the circular economy that Casey brought forward, and feminist economics that really demonstrate a very different system of how we can relate to a care economy meaning one in which all that unpaid and undervalued and unseen labor of women and their caretaking is acknowledged. So there's not really a lack of solutions. There's interference to people doing the people's work. And that's what we're really demanding here, is that that get acknowledged. And we need to remember also that as governments are here negotiating, we are very clear. Many of us are already engaged with governments as part of our work. We are engaged in financial institution work. We do divestment work at WECAN with banks and asset managers. We have engagement every time there is a fossil fuel pipeline going through one of the communities we work with. So we have a lot of engagement. And the thing that I want to be really clear is we're often told that we're naive or we don't understand how politics works and how much time it takes. Or we hear from the financial institutions that we don't understand how business works and how much money they need to make every year. And what we're saying is, stop. No more business as usual. This is a global climate emergency. We cannot continue as we were. That's made very clear by Mother Earth and all of the disasters that have come from the climate crisis and the way especially frontline communities are suffering. So we're saying, no, we actually do understand. We want you to understand the laws of physics. We want you to understand what Mother Earth is saying and what women are saying. And with that, I'd like to just sort of in the order that all of the women spoke, give you an opportunity for a closing comment, maybe a few minutes each. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the speakers and to Osprey for, again, holding this event. I think it's really important that there's been this common thread that as women, we're not just the most vulnerable to the climate crisis, but we have been also the most harmed by systems of colonization and extractivism. Whether it's through the safety of our women that has been compromised by the imposition of systems that don't work with the values and the ideologies of our communities, to whether it's the imposition of violence against our women through the workers that have no relationship to our lands and our communities that come in and impose violence, sexual and physical harm on our women. But that this is also an extension of the harm that they are perpetuating on our lands and our territories. And we come through with different systems. And I've had the challenge, why do you want to place patriarchy with matriarchy? And I think that there needs to be that understanding that they are fundamentally different. The systems of matriarchal thinking hold community in the center. It does not matter what your gender is, it is about community and holding the values of our communities, of our children, of our elders, of the babies and all of those in between. It's about holding the community in our center that makes matriarchal systems much more effective at addressing all of the problems that we collectively experience. And that is so different than the systems of patriarchy that come down through systems of colonialism, which are predicated on systems of hyper-individuality, the accumulation of wealth, notoriety, and power. We are not asking for power. We are asking for a fundamental shift in how we relate to each other and to the lands, which gets into the economic system that I want to speak to. Robin Wall-Kimmerer is an amazing writer, and I just want to end with this quote from her. She talks about currencies of economy, and this is, gratitude and reciprocity are the currency of a gift economy, and they have the remarkable property of multiplying with every exchange. Their energy concentrating as they pass from hand to hand, a truly renewable resource. I accept the gift from the bush, and then I spread that gift in a dish of berries to my neighbor, who makes a pie to share with his friend, who feels so wealthy in food and friendship that he volunteers at a food pantry. You know how it goes. This is the system that women bring forward, with our relationships with the land and each other, bringing forward not just economic systems, but relationality that connects us to the land and brings forward those systems that we truly desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ariel. Sônia?
Sim, ok. Agradecer por todo esse aprendizado, essa troca aqui com todas vocês.
I wish to give thanks for all the teachings and the exchange with all of you here.
Vemos que realmente nós não temos mais muito tempo, né? Temos que fortalecer essa corrente das mulheres indígenas do mundo.
And we see that we already do not have so much more time, and so we need to strengthen this immense current of women all over the world.
E juntas nós temos que falar pela democratização do uso da terra.
And together we need to be speaking up for the democratization of land use.
Chega da terra ficar concentrada na mão de poucos que pensam apenas em lucro para servir o capitalismo.
Enough with land being concentrated on the hands of just a few who only see it as profit in a capitalistic approach.
Que destrói o meio ambiente e as nossas vidas.
Those who are destroying the environment and our lives.
Então, né, termino aqui para que nós todas possamos estar, né, conectadas espiritualmente, culturalmente, com a nossa energia e a nossa resistência, para juntas curarmos a Mãe Terra.
And so I call upon all of us to be connected spiritually and energetically so that we together, we use our strength for the healing of the earth.
Nós não queremos mais tanto esses investimentos, queremos apenas que nos deixem em paz para que possamos seguir fazendo o que sempre fizemos.
We are not looking for all of these investments. We simply want to be left alone so that we can continue performing what we have always done.
Ser as porta-vozes da Mãe Terra.
To be the spokespeople of Mother Earth.
Obrigada.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
I think for me, I would love to close by saying that we need to challenge the aspect of climate colonialism in a sense that it is utter hypocrisy for the developed nations to actually fund initiatives in the South that have to combat climate change, but they still develop infrastructures that need consumption in the global North. So for me, that needs to stop. And it is at this particular moment that I'm calling up all women that have been listening and women that are working day and night, that we need to actually exercise our right to say no to a system that is working for a few corporates and elites and people in power. So let's say no. And for you, the leaders, this is your time to create a new legacy that says, I have contributed to reducing the aspect of climate change and how it impacts, especially people that have least contributed to how this crisis is standing. So that's what I could say. Thank you.
I want to close with saying that I think it's, as this panel, all this work is so important that it's intergenerational. I believe that the elderly, you have all the knowledge, but the youth can contribute with the visions for the future. And I think that that is also the power that indigenous communities hold, that we have this sense of community and youth contributing and the elderly contributing. And I think that's what we need to see more of here at COP2. But not just that, we need to see more indigenous people inside there. Yeah, I'm going to close with that.
So I was thinking it's so wonderful to hear everyone, to hear the manner in which you verbalize is just so powerful and so beautiful and so clear. I thank you, each one of you. I also want to point out that as the environmental ambassador for a nation within the United States, that I should be at that table with whatever heads of nations that are there. Because we have treaty rights that are not being upheld. And that's supposed to be the supreme law of the land in the United States. It has yet to be upheld. Also, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People that was signed on to by every nation state in the globe was enacted and I shouldn't say enacted, but it was signed on to since 2007 until about 2 years ago by various nation states, yet to be implemented. If that was implemented, then we would be taking care of you as our neighbors in every direction, because we would have the rights that are based in our nature that we know we're part of, not separate from. You know, we call ourselves those that protect the water and land defenders, when in reality we are nature defending itself right now. Within our territory, we have put bans on fracking and injection wells and had them upheld. We have a statute that's passed with the rights of nature in mind, called the Immutable Ponca Rights of Nature. And within that, climate itself has a right to be what it chooses to be. It knows, climate knows, Earth knows, Father Sky knows how to manage the situation to purify. If we will just keep the oil and gas in the ground, if we will just transition away, if we'll just think that 7 generations ahead as we've been taught. It's pretty easy, guys. Let's just do it.
So I want to thank everyone for your precious time. I know it's a very busy time here at the COP. And I also wanted to say, because I think it is unrecognized, the amount of effort it takes for frontline women, Indigenous, Black, and Brown, and frontline women from different countries to come to the COP is incredibly difficult. So I wanted to particularly thank all of you for the huge effort it takes to leave your communities, to leave your families, and the real inequity and injustice of that, really, to not only be the people being impacted first and worst, being the people also who have not created the climate crisis and contributed to all the huge carbon emissions of wealthy countries and wealthy corporations. And then to also then have the burden to come make your own case, to then have the burden to also come and fight for the last of your land, the water, the air, for really all of us, is something I think that often goes unrecognized, what it means to actually come to these spaces that are extremely difficult and to fight for human rights, to fight for Indigenous rights, to fight for gender equality, to fight for racial equality. Like, we're fighting for actually just to live as human beings close with the land, with the ways that we have for thousands of years before colonialism. And I think it's very important to hear the wisdom that has come from all of these women intergenerationally, to understand that it actually is not that complicated, but people are going to have to be willing to give up their greed, their hubris, their sense of political power, and for a lot of people to understand that they're going to have to find a different sense of identity than consumerism and having financial wealth. And I think this is a deep issue that we don't have time to address on this panel, but I just wanted to say that, you know, one of the things that we're seeing as we address white supremacy and people in the modern world is that a lot of people are going to need to understand that their ancestral healing is key to finding our way out of this crisis, because otherwise that hungry ghost of consumerism and greed and political hubris is going to keep driving us, because people are missing their identity with themselves, as was pointed out, their relationship with the land, that was pointed out, and it is time for that healing to happen. So even though we're talking about a lot of fighting, which we need to do, we also need to talk a lot about healing. And women have enormous knowledge to share about how we heal ourselves with the land so that we can have a healthy and just future. And we have just a few minutes, and I wondered, Casey, if you wish, if you would close us in our last minute, perhaps with song, so we can actually feel ourselves with the land, if that felt right to you.
Sure. I was just thinking that, you know, there's a sense of urgency, and that is a big message we need to say. All this talk is good. Action is what we need right now, immediately, to turn this around. So I'm going to sing a simple song, and all it says is, "My mother, you're good." That's it. Hey na how Danny, hey na nay, hey na how Danny, hey na nay, hey na how Danny, hey na nay, hey na how Danny, hey nadaneo, hey naudani, 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 hey nadaneo, hey naudani. Hey nadaneo, hey naudani, hey nadaneo, hey naudani, hey nadaneo.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you.